cooperatives have been in history. But I look at this screen and I think it looks like, why, you know, don't do it. Obviously, we're going to try and give you something different, you know, encourage you to set up a worker cooperative. I wanted to start with a little bit of history, and I'm not a historian, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. But I thought there were interesting aspects of worker cooperations that were often unknown, and especially in Ireland. So the date of the birth of the cooperative movement is usually dated back to the 19th century and the early 19th century, in particular under the influence of utopian socialists such as Robert Owen, and also movements such as Chartism in England. In particular, consumer cooperatives emerged in the 1830s in England, and also actually in Northern Ireland, again under the influence of Robert Owen, in particular in industrial Belfast. Now, they were short-lived experiments, which is why we tend to say that the birthplace of cooperation is Rochdale, where a cooperative shop was set up in 1844. Now, I don't like calling it birthplace of cooperation because I think cooperation has existed everywhere in the world in many different forms. But we tend to think about Rochdale as a birthplace because this was the first time we had the elaborated cooperative principles, and also it was not short-lived. It was quite substantial, you know, cooperative. So in Rochdale in 1844, weavers and cobblers in the middle of an economic recession decided to set up a shop to provide goods at unaffordable prices. But the reason why I'm mentioning that is because they also attempted at setting up a producer cooperative, especially in the steam spinning mills. And while that didn't work out, it was part of their vision to have several steps of cooperation, to start with a cooperative shop, a consumer cooperative, but then to move on to producer cooperatives, and eventually a cooperative community. So I think it's important because obviously we need to think of worker cooperatives as part of local community planning and not just in isolation. Obviously in the United Kingdom and in Ireland as well, worker cooperatives tended to be eclipsed in England by consumer cooperatives, in Ireland by agricultural cooperatives and credit unions. However, at the beginning of the 19th century, there were experiments, I wouldn't call them worker cooperatives, but experiments with workers' control of the industry. And in particular, the trade union movement was closely tied in the UK and in Ireland with the demands for the rights of working people to the cooperative ownership and control of the industry and its products. And while the labor movement grew and the cooperative movement grew separately, there was very much at the beginning that kind of shared vision. And in particular, in the 1830s in Ireland, it became a common occurrence for trade unionists on strike to actually set up a cooperative workshop and to dispose some of the production through the cooperative shops. So the reason why I mentioned that is because there is a constant downplaying, and suppressing of cooperative history. We don't talk enough about cooperatives. We don't talk at all about worker cooperatives. And actually, worker cooperatives in Ireland, as much as anywhere else in the world, have captured the attention of various trade unionists and intellectuals in conceiving an emancipatory alternative to working class injustice. And I've put James Connolly here because James Connolly actually mentions the potential for worker cooperation from a trade union perspective in the reconquest of Ireland. The second reason, as I said, is I want to think about worker cooperatives as part of local community planning. One tool to strengthen economic democracy. And I don't want them to be thought of in isolation as the self-interest of the workers, you know, in the cooperative businesses. And that was the vision of Rochdale, and that was the vision of Robert Owen and the Village of Cooperations, to think of them as producing a cooperative community. Which leads me to the definition of worker cooperatives. I very much like that definition from the Democracy at Work Institute that says a worker cooperative is a value-driven business that puts workers and the community benefit at the core of its purpose. So these are community businesses. Of course, the workers own the business and they participate to its financial success, and they control the business. They have representation, or it's a flat structure under the principle of one worker, one vote. Now that makes it very different from employee ownership businesses such as John Lewis. We're talking here about workers' control. Another definition by CICOPA, which is the body that represents worker cooperatives worldwide, is that worker cooperatives have the objective of creating and maintaining sustainable jobs and generating wealth. And again, they promote community and local development. So I like to see them as part of local community development. They come in different forms, obviously. Some of them, and Tiziana might touch upon that, some of them will be registered as under the Cooperative and Community Benefit Societies Act. Some of them will be registered as companies or limited partnership. There's no specific legislation for worker cooperatives in the United Kingdom and Ireland. And we only find around 500 worker cooperatives in the UK. And I would say 6, 7 probably in Northern Ireland and around 20 in the Republic of Ireland. As in any other cooperative, they share the principles of cooperation. The first one being voluntary and open membership. In a worker cooperative, that means that all workers should be offered to be a member, usually after a probationary period. And it means that the majority of the workers should be members and the majority of the members should be workers. So you couldn't have just a very small proportion of members who have a say in the democratic running of the business, and then a large proportion of workers who don't have a say. That would not be a worker cooperative. Principle 2, the democratic member control. As I said, we're talking here, or we're aiming at workers' control, not just workers' ownership. The member economic participation, which usually relate to the profit. Now, profit tends to be divided or shared as dividends to the shareholders, in this case, to the workers. But profit is a lot more than that in a worker cooperative. Some of it, and actually a significant part of it, tends to be allocated to reserves so that the cooperative can grow, can reinvest, and is financially stable. But it also ensures pay and benefits for the workers. I think worker cooperatives have these redistributive practices where we see they set aside enough money to pay workers a decent wage and also to put benefits aside for the workers. And we see in worker cooperatives in America, in the care sector in particular, that care worker owners will tend to have benefits such as health insurance, holiday pay, sick pay, that the rest of the sector doesn't have. So I think we need to think as profit as being divided fairly, as being redistributive in the case of a cooperative. Cooperatives are also autonomous and independent, which means here that if they raise capital, they cannot open it up to community shares. So they will tend to use land stock. They cannot lose that independence and open up their membership to people who are not workers. It is the responsibility of worker cooperatives to provide education and training for its members. And that means specialist training on certain specialist jobs, technical skills, but it also means membership and cooperative skills. And there is a responsibility to educate the wider public, to educate business partners, customers, for instance, on what cooperation means. There is also a responsibility to be part of a wider movement with cooperatives and in particular trades with other cooperatives to create economies of scales. And finally, as I said, there is this concern for the community. So cooperatives are rooted in a community. And sometimes that means that they are economically resilient, but also environmentally sustainable. They promote ethical business standards and workers' welfare. What is less known of, but actually well researched, is that there are many benefits to worker cooperatives. As democratically run businesses, they remunerate labor fairly, they emphasize training, research, innovation, they don't distribute profit disproportionately to shareholders, and they have a track record of being economically more resilient and more efficient. That means that they are better businesses than conventional businesses at the business part. They are found in every sector. And there is research now emerging because cooperatives tend to be thought as very small, worker cooperatives tend to be thought as very small. But there is research from Virginie Perrotin, which is a comparative research in the UK, US, and France, where she shows that actually they tend to be larger than the rest of businesses. And this is because we tend to have this myth about the economy, that the economy is made of multinational corporations. Well, actually, in those countries, 90% of firms have less than 20 employees. And in Northern Ireland alone, 89% of businesses have less than 9 employees. So the economy actually functions on very, very small businesses. Most of the firms are actually very small. And in that respect, worker cooperatives are no smaller, they tend to be larger, and they are not necessarily less capital intensive either. On top of that, they do survive either as long or longer than most conventional businesses. In the UK, it tends to be longer. Their survival rate, and that's for all cooperatives, is at least twice that of traditional firms. They're more productive, that's research from Perrotin as well. The staff working is better and smarter, the production is more efficient. They retain a larger share of the profit in the business, which means that they can reinvest and be financially stable. And there's research from Cooperatives UK that show that worker cooperatives in the UK contribute to 35% more employment for every £1 of turnover compared to other businesses. They also play a role in safeguarding and creating decent employment. And I think that's really important when we look at economic recessions in particular. They tend to have what we call a counter-cyclical tendency, so they tend to kind of increase where the economy is down. And when confronted with recession, we've seen worker cooperatives will safeguard employment. So they might lower their wages to keep everybody employed, or they might sacrifice some of the profit, but keep everybody employed. We also see how they can safeguard employment through recovered factories. That was quite important in Argentina, in Italy, and in France after the crisis. For instance, in Italy, where there is a legislation that facilitates the transfer of enterprises to workers, they have found that since 1979, more than 9,000 jobs have actually been saved through the conversion of 257 enterprises into worker cooperatives. So they do provide a tool. And when research is emerging that in the UK in the next few years, 120,000 family businesses will face a succession issue where no one will be able to take over the business, we need to start thinking of worker cooperatives as a tool for local economic development and trying to save those enterprises and also safeguard employment. Obviously, as I've put happier businesses, it's not just their economic performance. They also foster autonomy, democratic decision-making, trust, cohesion, higher job satisfaction. And all of this is well known. There is quite a lot of research on this. And in particular, there's an element in the literature that looks at cooperative experiments involving those who are most marginalized by traditional economic development strategies, such as ex-felons, unemployed. They contribute to gender empowerment, with the role of women, and their role in alleviating poverty as well is well researched, well documented. They also promote ethical practices, in particular with an emphasis on fostering environmental sustainability and workers' welfare, and they're well suited to tackle climate breakdown at the community level. And finally, as I've mentioned, they play a role in the local economy. So we see their role as fostering a vibrant and diversified local economy where the local community is the main beneficiary. And when we look at the moment at regional economic development in Ireland in particular, but I mean elsewhere in the world, which is dominated by a market-led approach, where not by long-term social needs, which is characterized by a race towards innovation, competitiveness, subsidizing multinational cooperation with public money, which actually intensify what we call capital flight. So they tend to move away because someone else is going to offer them another subsidy. On the other hand, small, geographically rooted, democratically controlled businesses offer a means to help, to alleviate the sequels of globalization, to help those economic benefits trickle down. I don't like using that word, but I think in this case, it can be used. And we're seeing this in particular with the emergence of community wealth building, with the example of Preston in England or Cleveland in the United States, where worker cooperatives are thought of as part of ways of transforming local economic development to make sure that the community becomes the beneficiary, as I said. Of course, there are cooperative failures as well. And in particular, there is a tendency in the UK that has been described as a tendency to degenerate into capitalist enterprises. But overall, the negatives are simply the reverse of the advantages. So when you see that loyalty, deep commitment to the survival of the business can increase performance, if you have a lack of discipline, lack of motivation, a reluctance to invest, short-sightedness, or even an absence of real democracy, then that can lead to failure. And underinvestment in particular is a big issue with cooperatives not having access, to too much capital. On the other hand, I think the environment has a lot to do with that. And we see that this thesis of degeneration doesn't exist in countries where there is a supportive environment and there is legislation that prevents cooperatives being sold off later on down the line when they become profitable. And we see what is essential for cooperatives to thrive is a supportive environment that is based on tailored advice, on financial support, and on benevolent legislations, which doesn't really exist, and I'm sure Tiziana will mention that, in Northern Ireland to such an extent. Explain, I think, the figures that we see here with worker cooperatives. While there are 11 million worker members worldwide, we find 25,000 worker cooperatives in Italy. I was checking the website for the French cooperatives lately, and it was 3,611. That includes social cooperatives. Now, that might not seem much, but those 3,000 cooperatives or more contribute to 67,000 jobs. So it's quite significant in terms of employment. We see the Mondragon Corporation, the latest figure was over 80,000 worker owners. So it is an ensemble, a complex of different cooperatives which are run by its 80,000 workers. And I think this is really powerful. It trades internationally. It has its own bank, its own university. It has an apprenticeship school, business and innovation, education. So it's quite an interesting example. As I said, there are only 500 worker co-ops in the UK. And there was research done by Michael Gavin in 2014, where he only found 20 worker cooperatives still trading in Ireland, North and South. And the reason for this is mainly the lack of institutional support, and especially the fact that there is no longer a cooperative development unit in the Republic of Ireland. So while they are quite small, it doesn't mean that you don't have worker cooperatives in Northern Ireland. And here are a few examples of worker cooperatives that have been trading. Some of them are no longer trading in Northern Ireland. But it's interesting to see that they trade in all sectors of production, whether it's cleaning services, taxi, cafe, craft, beer production, political education. And because we're looking here today at why should you set up a worker cooperative, I wanted to talk about the research that I've done in Belfast in particular, and the reasons why people have decided to set up worker cooperatives. Obviously, there tends to be a lot of heterogeneity. People will join later on in the process for very different reasons, but I'll highlight 3 different themes. And I want to say there was an importance a lot of the time of founding members. You know, founding members tend to be, as one participant put it, the visionary for the whole thing. And participants or workers who join later on, sometimes they are leaving that vision, you know, they are not driving it. But it's important for a worker cooperative, for all workers to obviously join that vision. But I know that there's an importance of founding members. In terms of reasons, there was very much for the worker cooperatives in Belfast, a desire for empowerment. And I am using their own words here, in the face of social deprivation, hardship, and exclusion. And I think some people set up worker cooperatives after having worked, whether it's cleaning industry or hospitality sector, in sectors that are very precarious, where they found that their work was not fulfilling, it was depriving them of a sense of pride, it was not giving them control over their lives. And sometimes it was not enabling them to realize their potential. They might have trained or gone to university doing something completely different and ending up in a sector that was just not that. One participant called it the trap, you know, in particular in creative industries where people work in call centers and are not doing the creative work that they would like to do. But worker cooperatives similarly were also offering an opportunity for those who are excluded from the labor market, whether it's people with criminal convictions or whether it's women in particular who take career breaks and therefore have not a lot of paid working experience. So that helped them actually access jobs. And I like this sentence that a participant said. He said, you know, worker cooperatives provide an apprenticeship of the old. A second reason for setting up a worker cooperative was very much around ethical commitments to environmental sustainability, anti-consumerism, social justice, and not just making a profit. And sometimes it was what we call that added value that drove participants to join, to set up and to join a worker cooperative. And I really liked that quote from one participant where we were talking about ethical consumerism, but she says, more than what you're buying, what you're actually purchasing, you can be active where you work. Who do you work for? Who do you give your workforce to? So you have that responsibility, not for where you put your money and what you buy, but how you make your money and what kind of business you support with your workforce. And I thought that was a very interesting aspect of how worker ownership and worker control can lead to conscious production, not just conscious consumerism, which we talk a lot, ethical consumerism, but conscious production. And we have examples, I mean, the Lucas plan is one, and I can mention it later on, but where workers try to take control of the production and shift away to develop socially useful technologies, products that are actually socially useful, and especially in the case of tackling climate change. And finally, the last reason was to do with antagonist politics. And what I mean by that is those projects were fostered by visions that were anti-capitalist, anti-sectarian, and anti-patriarchal. For those cooperatives, it was about creating a lived reality beyond capitalism, beyond sectarianism in Northern Ireland, beyond patriarchy. And being in a worker cooperative represented, being a feminist, another way of being a feminist, another way of being a socialist. Now, it's not the case for all the worker cooperatives in Northern Ireland, but I thought it was interesting because it highlights what is too often overlooked in research and in policy, which is critical agency. Critical agency is that ability, even in an environment like Northern Ireland, which is dominated by neoliberalism, by sectarianism. Critical agency is that ability to resist, that ability to rebel, that ability to build something different. And I think, Richmond, who is a scholar on peace building, say critical agency is the black matter. It's everywhere, resistance is everywhere, but it's never talked about. And I thought that was a very interesting aspect of worker cooperation. So I will finish on that quote that I think exemplifies that from a cooperative called Heart Irish. It's in Irish, an Irish feminist cooperative. And she says, people can think that the world is gonna end before capitalism ends. I'm only using parts of that quote. And I can't get my head around that. Of course there are alternatives. Of course the planet can be saved. Of course there is a different economic model which is fair to people and places and the environment. And the only way, I suppose, to get people out of that mindset is to say, here is an actual example. No matter how small it is, that it can work. Our co-op's not going to change the world. It will probably change very little, but at least we're trying. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you. I think that it was interesting. Do we have any question? If we have any question, we can stop now.
No, all good.
All good, all good. Thank you very much. Then maybe we carry on and we can kind of go and explore the second part of our discussion. Allow me to share my screen if you don't mind. And the second part of our discussion is about it's about how we are going to set up a workers' cooperative. So in this kind of next half an hour, we will look at what we define as a two-pronged approach. And then we'll define also the three main areas of development: members, governance, and business development, so that we give you an insight of what workers' cooperative can look like, and how and what are the things that you need to pay attention if you are intending to set up one. So I pick up from one of the definition that Ellie has actually already introduced to you, and is what are workers' cooperative? And we refer very much to this definition in particular, because in some sort of way, it really kind of set out some of the parameters within which a worker cooperative will operate. So it says very clearly there that a worker cooperative is set up with one or a different objective: improve the quality of life of workers' members, dignify human work, and allow workers' democratic self-management. Of course, on top of that, you have your principles, as Ellie has introduced them, to promote the community and local development. But those three kind of issues, to improve the quality of the worker member, dignify human work, and workers' democratic control are the real three issues that if you're thinking to set up a worker cooperative, then you need to really make space for those concepts and make it that being built in your operations completely. Why we call it a two-pronged approach is because cooperative development and business development are the two aspects of any cooperative enterprise, and in particular for workers' cooperative enterprise, that they need to go hand to hand. Without paying attention to developing the skills and the, oh, sorry, we have a new person joining in. Without paying attention to the cooperative aspects or the cooperative skills of your enterprise, you may not find that connection with your business. And if you don't pay attention to the type of business that your cooperative is going to embrace, then again, you may set up a cooperative that is not self-sustaining, and it will collapse. At the end of the day, you need to really think and reflect on both aspects of your enterprise. So here are the initial stages. So if you are thinking about a workers' cooperative as a possible enterprise for your business idea, then here what you probably needed to pay attention to. Aims and motivation. Most of the workers' cooperatives are very strong in providing meaningful employment. They set up not to provide products or service. Their main and primary objective is to provide jobs. Jobs that they are particularly good jobs that allowed the workers to be part of the decision-making and also to achieve better wages. At the end of the day, that is very legitimate aim in your cooperatives. You want to distribute the wealth you are creating equitably among the workers' members. Then another very basic questions you have to ask yourself if you wanted to set up a cooperative is, what is your idea? What actually you wanted to do with your workers' cooperative? Is there a need? So you needed to really scan through your community. And at the end of the day, those the cooperatives are those type of enterprises that they are not driven by the profit. They are not going to choose where to make the most money or what is the trend and the fashion that allow the enterprise to thrive. They are actually enterprises that they look at the community in general, they scan the landscape and try to identify what are the needs that people have and yet not addressed. So it may be a new product, it may be a new service, it may be something that will that community support in a way that will create the jobs. Of course, you needed to ask, is that product and service feasible? So try to really think also in realistic terms about what we are going to offer. Interestingly, a lot of cooperatives are product driven. For instance, we had not only within Northern Ireland, but in the UK, cooperatives that produce bread, that produce beer as well, that produce any kind of products that they are not widely awaited. So bread that was not produced only as bread, but maybe was organic bread done in particular way to actually support the need of a particular niche of the market. So those are consideration around your business. But then is the final and basic question. Does it suit all these ideas, your aims and your idea, does it suit the workers' cooperative model? And these are some of the alarm bells that should ring if any of these questions are not answered in this way. So if you're considering your own enterprise as your own and where you are in charge and there is no sharing of decision-making process with other people, then it's not the right way to set up a cooperative. That is a different type of enterprise that you're looking for. If you are not able to share the ownership of your enterprise, then maybe you should think about it. If you wanted to do it by yourself, again, that is not a cooperative. By legislation here in Northern Ireland, you need at least a minimum of 2-3 people, depends on what the legislation you are using. So if you are thinking about doing something by yourself, is not the cooperative model the most appropriate, that the most suitable that you need to look at. But if you have a group of people committed to the idea of sharing power, sharing ownership, sharing decision-making, and sharing profit, then here is the cooperative model is for you. So workers' members are at the core of your cooperative. A cooperative at the end of the day is made of people. It's not made of the gathering of capital, as the usual company are structured around. Company really put more emphasis on capital than on people. Cooperatives are the other way around. They put a strong emphasis on people, and people are their members. And in a workers' cooperative are the workers. So what do we need then? We need to start to build a group of workers that they are able to work together. So committed workers are important. Appropriate skills and competencies are important. Workers who share the workload, that's extremely important, because again, the fairness and the equitably, the division of work is an important part of the work of the workers' cooperative. They needed to share decision making, and the workers also needed to share the wealth they created. So what are the initial tools that you can use at the beginning of your development? You can set up a steering group, a group of people interested in the idea, and start to really look at how can we work together? What does it mean to share the workload? How do we take a decision? In which way then we will look at the business, and in which way we will divide the profit. And that steering group will be your original kind of group of people that will bring the cooperative from an idea to actually a proper trading cooperative, register and all. The steering group period is one of the most important and most delicate one, if you wanted to consider it in the development of your cooperative, because it's really when you are testing if people is committed to the idea, if he's committing also to the principle and shares the same value that you share. So it's very important at that period. Do not underestimate the time you spend to build up the relationship within your members. And of course, one of the things that you can do together, one of the first tasks that you can give yourself is create a membership policy. So who are the people that we need to work with? How can we recruit them? How can we attract them to our workers' cooperative? So you have already a couple of tools to start to develop the idea. You needed to start somewhere. And that where is always start with a group of people and putting down the concept that you have for your cooperative and start to discuss it. Democratically discuss it. So democracy is not a principle that is out there and is very theoretical. It's actually becoming very practical. So democracy in practice means listening to each other, try to maintain a relationship where respect and dignity are important, solidarity. If somebody doesn't really understand something, give time for sharing information, knowledge, and help to prepare each of your steering group members with the right ideas, the right attitudes, and the right values to then carry on and develop your business. The governance of a workers' cooperative has a kind of different levels and depends on how many members mostly the cooperative have. At the beginning, you may see most of the cooperative organize themselves as a collective. And it's the picture on your left-hand side where the red dots are your members and all the arrows, they go in all directions. That collective picture, the picture on the first one on your screen on the left-hand side, really is a representation of a cooperative that decides about everything. So there is no need to divide between I am the boss, I am the manager, you are the worker. All the members are the same. All the members participate in all aspects of the business. And that's possible because the cooperative probably is just at the beginning and it's quite small. Most of the cooperatives get a bit bigger than the founder members, the members that they are involved at the beginning. So how do we preserve the democratic and the role of each member? How can we listen to each member in a democratic way, even when they are bigger? Well, the picture in the middle, it can give you an idea of how to structure a bigger cooperative. And we call that, and we refer to that as self-managing work teams. When you have a bigger cooperative, you can maybe divide the workers in a self-managing team, independent teams so that they look after different aspects of the business. So maybe one team could look after sales, while another team could look after production, and another team can look after distribution. So somebody is in charge, a group of people in charge of the van, another group of people is in charge of making the bread, and then another group of people is in charge of selling it. So those teams are not divided in a kind of pyramid way, but they are all the same and they are self-managed. They are really trying to make a decision-making easier for the business because they just divide the function of the business, not the power. They don't create power levels in the business. Of course, they can send a representative to an elected body and where other decisions about the strategy of the business can be taken. But in reality, these are still quite flat organization, although they require different teams. Interestingly, in some cooperatives, those teams are not rigid. The members may swap, may go in different teams so that somebody from production can go into sales and somebody in sales can go in distribution, for instance, just to learn the skills. And that's a part also of the principles of cooperation, where we say that one of the principles is about education. And education really goes down to the education of the members. And by swapping position, you are creating a workforce that actually is very skilled and very competent in more than one part of the organization. So you also may read and may find out or look at cases in which there are a level of management, and that is what you will look at. You can see in this third picture on your screen, the one on your right-hand side. And those little dots, gray dots, are representing a level of management that may have a delegated authority to deal with different areas of the business. So you have a manager in sales or in production, etc. But even in those situations, one of the characteristics of the workers' cooperative is that it maintains a quite close kind of distance between the workers and the management. And management is more viewed as a function of the organization rather than a status. And therefore, is not rewarded much more in wages, for instance, than the rest of the workers. In one of the biggest workers' cooperative in the world, Mondragon, they rationed between the wage of the workers that do one of the most basic jobs to managing is not more than 1 to 6. And that ratio is really not the ratio that you find nowadays in companies in which management has maybe 10 or 100 times more, like in some of the banks, bigger wages than anybody else doing a most basic job within the organization. So that ratio between the highest position and the lowest position is quite close in a worker cooperative. That doesn't happen nowadays with the bigger corporations. So in some sort of way, you can have it, you can organize the workers in many different ways, but mostly the basic form is to preserve the voice of each workers in different parts of the business in itself, but also try to make it quite flat and without creating unduly and a very not helpful kind of pyramid kind of shapes in governance. The final part of your worker cooperative, and you needed to really think about it in terms of the business. And that is again something that you can start to prepare during the steering group phase when you are developing the concept of your worker cooperatives. You needed to do some market research in the sense that kind of scanning the landscape of your community and try to understand what are the needs of your community, what are the things that you want to address with your products and your service that will be useful for your community. Once you have done that research, then it's easier to develop the products and the services. Remember also that in this kind of reasoning, you may have to look at your pricing strategy or the way you want to reach out as many people as possible, but with an affordable pricing strategy. So that's are all things that are part of your discussion at the beginning of your workers' cooperative. You may need also to find out from where you're going to operate and how much money you need to raise in order to start up your business. It may be that you need premises, for instance, and you need a deposit for those premises. So how you raise your money needs to be also considered within your development phase. So the journey of your startup cooperative is not very different from any other startup cooperative. The way is different is that these are collective decisions. These are decisions taken by a group of people and agree through consensus more often than not. And and that is the way the cooperative starts to embed the cooperative values within their own practice by developing the business. So the financial, as I said, it's about raising the money. It's about trying to then look at if in which way the cooperative will perform and try to forecast the profit that the cooperative will make. Then you need to organize. One of the first things that you will need to do is to register. Remember, again, in any form you want to do your own or register your cooperative, you need to consider that you need to protect your liability for what you're doing. So it's important that when you start trading, you are a registered entity, either under the Cooperative Community Benefit Society Act. That is the one we are usually use because it's easier for us to embed the principles and the vision of cooperatives within that legislation. But you could use, as Ellie said, any other legislation like the Company Act. Nevertheless, you need also to really modify maybe some of the articles in a way that those principles of democratic control, one member, one vote, are really explicit, so that there are no kind of confusion, that members are treated, have all the same voice, and they have all the same power. And they are also the co-owner of the business. So another aspect, another part of your development, the business development, is opening a bank account, for instance. That you may think, oh, it's so silly, but opening a bank account can be challenging nowadays. So doing it from a cooperative, as a group, as a collective, really will test your patience. And prepare some of the policy, the membership policy, or any policy that you need to operate your business in a safe and in a safe way for you and for everybody else around you. Remember, you are the workers, but you are also the boss. So you need to really take responsibility for yourself and for the people that work around you. And that's an important aspect of a workers' cooperative. There is no escape. You cannot assume that somebody else is doing it in your place. Everybody has to contribute to this particular time of the workers' cooperative development. When you are right at the beginning, everybody has the chance to contribute even more. And then, of course, you have to, when you have a full picture of your workers' cooperative, how does it look like? How do we take decisions? How do we work with each other? And then what type of work we are going to do? What type of business we want to do? Then you are just there, ready to start trading. And with your implementation plan, you need to allocate the jobs and give you a date, the launch day. And that date can be a great celebration for many of the workers' cooperative that we so So resources, there are plenty of resources. There is the Workers' Cooperative Code that you can find from Cooperatives UK. There are a couple of publications from Radical Roots and Seed for Change. They have prepared a nice manual. I think that it costs about £7. It's quite accessible. So look at those links when you will receive the presentation. There is also support available in Northern Ireland, and specifically, this is what we are, but some of this support is also available outside Northern Ireland, UK-wide. So the Belfast City Council has a program to support the cooperatives and social enterprise. We are interested in cooperatives, and so you can get coaching, mentoring, and advice one-to-one. What we mean is one-to-one from Cooperative Alternatives. Cooperative Alternatives training and webinars. We have a series of training and webinars that we keep repeating and doing, and it can be about the cooperative journey, cooperative advantages, cooperative in action, the funding for cooperative, sociocracy, that is a nice, interesting new way of making decision and taking decision, and community wealth building and cooperatives that we explored in some of the policy papers that Hallie has done, but with this kind of a framework, interesting policy framework. Also do check thehive.coop. It's an online resources, and again is supporting programs of development for cooperatives. And here in Northern Ireland, we can help you to get that support. So I will say that I will stop here. Thank you, and we can discuss maybe if you have any questions, any of the issues that we touched today.
Maybe we can stop the recording and just have the conversation. I'm thinking for Jade that might be easier.
Yeah.